It's a toughie. Well, Catherine talked about personnel a minute ago, right? The president wants to fire Lisa Cook. That one's going to court. Stephen Myron, who is on leave, air quotes, from the Council of Economic Advisors, is now voting on interest rate policy. How worried are you about the personnel dynamics as the Fed tries to run this economy?
This is what I asked Powell at the press conference.
That's why I'm asking you, man.
This is a big question that when I talk to my sources about this risk to Fed independence, this is what they bring up. All of the Fed presidents are up for reappointment. It happens every 5 years, and next year just happens to be
we should say regional Fed presidents, right?
Regional Fed presidents, yes, the regional Fed presidents. And I asked Powell, should we expect some changes? And is that something the Fed board is thinking about? And he gave me a process answer. He said it's a process. He said they're going to announce the outcome of said process with plenty of time, but it is definitely an interesting time for this to happen at the same time where the White House clearly wants to see some changes, a lot of changes at the Fed.
I will tell you, we were watching the meeting here in the office, and all of us, when he gave you that process answer, all three of us were like, he didn't answer the question. He didn't answer the question.
He did not.
Because he did not. Courtney Brown at Axios, Catherine Rampell at MSNBC, and The Bulwark. Thanks, you two.
Thanks, Guy. Have a good weekend.
Wall Street on this Friday. Traders are still feeling pretty good, actually, late in the year. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. So there was that Jay Powell press conference Wednesday, and somewhere in there, in between talk of the Fed's balance sheet and what the central bank may or may not do with interest rates, at its December meeting, Powell said this.
If you listen to the earnings calls or the reports of, big public consumer-facing companies, many of them are saying that there's a bifurcated economy there.
Upper income consumers are going out and spending. Lower income consumers are spending less. A K-shaped economy is the vernacular. And it turns out that divergence is showing up in corporate America, too. Profits are surging at the biggest, that is, upper income companies, to torture the analogy, while profits at smaller companies are more sluggish. Marketplace's Justin Ho has that one.
When we're talking about the biggest companies pulling in the most profits, we're really talking about big tech companies.
They're benefiting from some themes and megatrends such as AI and cloud computing, and they have very wide moats of power.
That's Nathan Tuft with Manulife Investment Management. He says those wide moats of power are filled with money, which they can use to fend off the competition.
To innovate and introduce new technologies at a very fast pace relative to some of the rest of the market.
Tuft says smaller companies have been more reluctant to make those kinds of investments, especially since economic policy has been so hard to predict this year.
And that policy uncertainty certainly impacted smaller companies more than large companies. And it just impacted how they made business decisions. It had them defer decisions.
And that's making it hard for smaller corporations to pull in profit. Evan Raleigh, a professor at the University of Connecticut, says that can make it even harder for smaller companies to catch up.
Capital flows towards the firms that make money. And so unless they can find a way to fight back and create useful products that people and businesses want, they're going to shrink and they're going to become less and less important.
Raleigh says that's not necessarily a bad thing for the economy overall.
In terms of economic growth, it's good. I mean, we're having growth and some people are winners and some people are losers, but overall the cake is growing.
But the concern, he says, is that these tech giants are too dominant.
In cloud computing, there's basically 3 players. Operating systems, there's basically 2 players. In search, there's basically 2 or 3 players. So you have these oligopolies, and that gives them a lot of pricing power.
Which raises costs for consumers and businesses. Another concern is that an increasingly powerful tech sector could make the economy more vulnerable to a tech slowdown. John Bai is a finance professor at Northeastern University.
Eventually, it's going to reach an equilibrium, kind of like a balance point where they're going to find their new growth pattern.
Which means the industry will have to adjust.
When that happens, just a number of people, you can call it overhired people at this point in time, will inevitably be let go.
The hope, Bai says, is that those tech sector workers would eventually get scooped up by other industries. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
Those K-shaped corporate profits flow from a K-shaped consumer economy. A very thin slice of consumers in the top 20 or so percent of incomes is doing the majority of spending, evidence of which can be found in Apple's latest earnings. After a couple of years of sluggish for them sales, the iPhone 17 pretty much blew the doors off last quarter. Retail price of said phone, $799. Marketplace's Henry Epp looks at how we got here and what it's going to mean for where we're going.
This concentration of spending at the top has been building for decades, driven by widening wealth inequality, says Christina Sargent, an economist at Middlebury College.
Higher earners have seen strong wage growth and massive gains in wealth from stock and housing. Meanwhile, middle and lower income households are squeezed by rising costs like rent and childcare, groceries, the basics.
This inequality has really shown up in spending the last few years as consumers have grappled with inflation, and it's changed the kinds of things people in different economic classes buy, says Leo Feller at the consumer insight company Numerator.
Everyone has kept buying food. Everyone has kept buying health and personal care items such as deodorant and soap and toothpaste.
But then there's pretty much everything else: vacations, restaurants, discretionary goods.
This is going to include things like toys, electronics, sporting goods, apparel. This is where we really see a big pullback amongst lower income consumers, and higher income consumers have continued to spend.
The potential trouble with an economy propped up by the wealthiest is that a lot of them are feeling wealthy thanks to the stock market, says Christina Sargent at Middlebury.
So if the stock market dips, that can ripple out really quickly. And the wealthier households make fewer big ticket purchases. We see slower demand and then knock-on effects for jobs.
It's like the economy's a table balancing on just 3 legs, Sargent says.
You're fine in good times, but it gets shakier as things turn to be a little bit less stable.
But Betsy Stevenson at the University of Michigan says that concern that the wealthy might pull back in a downturn could be a bit overblown.
The higher income people tend to have savings as well as access to borrowing. And so they don't change their consumption very much as their wealth moves around.
The real risk to a K-shaped economy, Stevenson says, is social and political instability. I'm Henry Epp for Marketplace.
Coming up.
You know, I joke that if I could get a middle schooler to be honest about their feelings, I can make a person excited about a brick.
From teacher to tour guide, straight ahead. But first, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's up 40 points today. That's about 0.1%, 47,562. The Nasdaq climbed 143 points. That is 0.6%, 23,724. The S&P 500 gained 17 points. 0.25%, 68 and 40. For the week, the Dow found 0.75%. The Nasdaq added 4 1/10%. S&P 500 strengthened 0.7%. For the month, the Dow increased 1.7%. The Nasdaq pocketed 1 1/3%. The S&P 500 up 1 8/10%. Checking in on some of those companies on the top half of that K-shaped corporate economy. 3 big cloud computing firms had a mixed day, actually. Amazon accumulated 9.6% today. Alphabet dipped to 10%. Microsoft down 1.5%. We were talking about Apple as well. Slipped 0.4% there. Bonds up, yield on the 10-year T-note down 4.08%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Baird. Baird strives to attract and retain top financial professionals, providing stability and continuity of advice for clients across market environments. More information at BairdDifference.com. And by You.com, AI search infrastructure for the enterprise, helping replace complex workflows with LLM-agnostic custom agents and APIs designed to reason, act, and offer accurate outputs, all while being context-aware. YOU.com/marketplace. And by The Economist, introducing The Economist Insider, a new video offering with twice-weekly shows featuring in-depth analysis and expertise to make sense of an increasingly complex and turbulent world. More at economist.com/insider.
American democracy is one of the oldest democracies in the world.
On the next Radio Lab.
It's kind of like a laptop from 1985.
Does democracy need an update?
Corporate money, special interest lobbyists, the weirdness of the Electoral College, the two-party system in general, gerrymandering, and active voter suppression, and minority groups who don't get a voice. There's a lot to fix, right?
We imagine what a new democracy might look like on the next Radio Lab.
Tomorrow at noon on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by AEG Presents, presenting Brandi Carlile's The Human Tour 2026, with stops across North America coming to New York City on February 13th at Madison Square Garden. Tickets are available now at brandicarlile.com.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, if federal food aid is disrupted, the impact could be devastating to thousands of grocery stores that serve SNAP recipients. Some businesses may have to lay off staff or even close. We're going to hear all about it at 7.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Risdal. This is pretty much self-evident, but we need food, which is another way to say we need American farmers. We also need electricity, much more of it now than we used to, thanks to our digital economy. Those two things collide headlong in a changing climate, and all of that is making things harder for farmers. So enter now a way to produce food and energy at the same time. Jenna Rose Schleiss reports.
Linda Hetzel gets up early to clip herbs, vegetables, and produce from the plants on her farm north of Kansas City.
Italian parsley, cutting celery, peppers. I'm trying peppers, which you normally think would be only in full sun.
Hetzel's peppers are shaded by 18 solar panels, hoisted more than 8 feet off the ground.
There's no blossom on it yet, but the plants look healthy.
Hetzel's been farming for 3 decades, and this is her first season planting under her new solar array, a strategy called agrivoltaics. The panels power her home and also provide shade, which is crucial for many crops in Missouri thanks to climate change.
I have observed over the 30 years here, the heating of this landscape is making it more difficult for some plants to thrive and even survive.
Hetzel has a small farm and a small-scale solar array, but agrivoltaic installations are more and more common. From 2020 to 2024, the number of agrivoltaic sites in the U.S. more than doubled to cover some 62,000 acres, because there's lots of land out there underneath larger solar projects.
Every time I see land space, I'm like, food.
Kajua Berry is with Minnesota-based nonprofit The Food Group, which offers training for new organic farmers. She says one huge challenge for farmers is finding affordable, consistent access to land to grow produce.
You know, whenever they rent land, they are just subjected to the annual lease. And they can plant perennials. I mean, they could, but it will cost them a lot of money, and then they can't take it with them.
So Berry is constantly hustling to find any little plot of available land for the farmers she works with.
My kids make fun of me because they're like, Mommy's probably just thinking about how many tomatoes or how many watermelons can we grow. I'm like, yes, you know me so well.
Now the Food Group is partnering with a Minnesota-based energy developer called U.S. Solar. They're piloting long-term farming leases for land underneath and around solar panels. The company gets free land maintenance, and the project's farmers get an essentially free space to grow their crops. Peter Schmidt with U.S. Solar says it's a good deal for his company because something has to happen to that land.
So whether it's pollinators, whether it's grazing, whether it's crop production, we're not going to leave it fallow.
Schmidt is U.S. Solar's director of project development and says the company has also experimented with other types of agrivoltaics, like planting pollinator habitat or providing pasture for flocks of sheep. He says this could be one answer for ag communities that wonder whether solar arrays are a good fit in general.
When we can come into a community and, they might have folks that are saying, we don't want to see farmland taken out of production. Well, our response would be, neither do we.
For some small-scale farmers in the Midwest, at least, it's working. Kajua Berry says the farmers she works with are now able to grow lettuce or herbs in the middle of the summer, thanks to the shade. In Kearney, Missouri, I'm Jana Rose Schleiss for Marketplace.
You know the story of the 3 little pigs, right? The first one had the house built of straw, the second of sticks, the third of bricks. Spoiler alert of sorts, I guess. That third one of brick was the only one that stayed standing when the wolf huffed and puffed. Now, yes, it's a fairy tale, and no, this isn't necessarily the moral of the story, but bricks are just darn good building material, which is why a lot of the oldest buildings still standing in these United States are made of brick or stone. Here's today's installment of our series, My Economy.
My name is Will Quam, and I run Brick of Chicago, which is a walking tour organization where I give brick-based walking tours of 11 neighborhoods all across Chicago. So I kind of came into this accidentally. I moved to Chicago originally to teach theater, and my work brought me all over the city and all over the suburbs. And what you start to notice the more time you spend in Chicago is how the building forms repeat. You know, we build the same bungalow over and over again, or the same two-flat, but that the brick is what makes each one unique. And I started to see that, hey, these aren't just red rectangles. There's texture, there's color, there's pattern. Slowly, I started building tours after a suggestion of a friend of mine who runs a tour organization. And then the pandemic hit and all my teaching stopped. And I was at home and my wife had the idea, hey, what if you give virtual tours? And I did. And it was really successful. And I was able to do that all of 2020 and 2021. And starting in 2021, I went back out in person. And now I give anywhere from 5 to 8 tours a week. There's a huge amount of overlap between my theater background and the work I do today. You know, I'm performing. I'm performing out there, trying to get people to be interested. You know, I joke that if I could get a middle schooler to be honest about their feelings, I can make a person excited about a brick. So I'm also an architecture photographer. So I take pictures for architects and developers and brick manufacturers and floor makers and all sorts of different people. And that's a big part of my income too. It comes out to about 60-40 tours, photos. It varies year to year. It's not a great side hustle, so to speak, in that all the timing of it overlaps with my tour work. People want photos when the weather's nice, when the sun is out. And that's also when people want to take tours. And that means then my winter is very quiet. I don't have as much going on. And that requires a lot of foresight and a lot of planning ahead when it comes to my finances, which I'm still learning how to be good at. Part of what's changed for me over the last few years too is not just thinking season to season, but having to think a little more long term, especially now that I have a kid. You know, right now I do 4 tours every weekend and I'm away from 10:30 to 5 every weekend. Looking ahead, I'm planning to hire a guide who can take over some routes, or I can have routes that run concurrently, or I can just be home more. So that's something I have to plan ahead for.
Will Quam, planning and running Brick of Chicago, Illinois. No matter where you are, no matter what you do, we cannot do this series without your stories. So send them to us, would you? Marketplace.org/myeconomy.
Marketplace is supported by JLL.